Hello, I'm Toro, and this is the Great Blunders. Every great civilization, every genius plan, every bold idea has its moments of unexpected failure. In this series, we gently explore the missteps, mistakes, and strange decisions that changed history, softly told, one blunder at a time. There's no drama here, just quiet hindsight, calm reflection, and a little curiosity. So settle in, breathe deep, and let's revisit a moment when the world didn't quite go as planned. The Great Blunders, the Decca Records rejection of the Beatles. Hello again, my dear dreamer. I'm Toro, and you're listening to Toro's History Lullabies, a soft-spoken journey into the curious folds of time, stories where wonder meets rest. Tonight's tale, part of our Great Blunders series, begins with four young musicians and a single, overlooked opportunity, an audition that didn't go the way they'd hoped. So get comfortable, let the day drift away, and join me as we gently unfold the story of how Decca Records, one of the great record labels of its time, turned down a little band from Liverpool called the Beatles. Let's take a quiet stroll back to the early 1960s, to a Britain wrapped in wool coats and whispers of change. The Second World War was still a living memory. The cities bore the marks of bombings, but beneath the gray bricks and crumbling chimneys, a new energy was stirring. Britain was on the edge of cultural transformation. A younger generation was ready to move past rationing and restraint. They longed for rhythm, color, and freedom. In the world of music, American rock and roll had crossed the Atlantic and taken root. Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, and Elvis Presley had captivated British teenagers with their driving beats and rebellious style. At first, this music had been dismissed by the older generation. Too loud, too wild, too different. But for many young people, it was electric. It spoke to a longing for change. And nowhere was that hunger more evident than in the North, in the working-class city of Liverpool, a bustling port on the River Mersey. Liverpool was a crossroads of people and ideas. Sailors brought in records from faraway places. Radio stations crackled with sounds that hadn't yet reached London. It was here in smoky clubs and drafty church halls that a group of young musicians began playing together. Their name, whimsical, catchy upon on beat, and Beatles, was the Beatles. John Lennon had started the group, fusing his love for skiffle and wordplay with a sharp wit and a rebellious edge. He was joined by Paul McCartney, a gifted melody maker with a warm voice and a natural charm. Soon came George Harrison, quiet and serious, but fiercely skilled on the guitar. And at that time, their drummer was Pete Best, a steady presence behind the kit. By 1961, the Beatles were playing regularly in clubs across Liverpool and Hamburg, Germany. Their time in Hamburg had especially shaped them, performing long hours night after night, developing endurance, style, and unity. They weren't polished yet, but they had something rare, a spark, a sound that felt both familiar and new. Enter Brian Epstein. Brian wasn't a music producer or a talent scout. He was the well-mannered manager of a family-owned record store, NEMS, the North End Music Stores, in Liverpool. But he had an ear for talent and a visionary's instinct. When he saw the Beatles perform at the Cavern Club, something clicked. Their charisma, their chemistry, it was undeniable. He offered to manage them. Though he was new to the industry, he carried himself with dignity, always impeccably dressed, always prepared. He believed, truly believed, that the Beatles could be bigger than anyone imagined. But in 1961 and 1962, record companies weren't looking to Liverpool for talent. London was the hub, the polished, respectable center of British music. The Beatles didn't quite fit the mold. Too northern, too rough around the edges. Still, Brian was determined. He made phone calls, sent letters, knocked on doors, and then one opportunity opened, a chance to audition for one of the major labels of the day, Decca Records. The date was set, January 1st, 1962. A new year, a fresh start, and perhaps the beginning of something extraordinary. The Beatles, John, Paul, George, and Pete piled into a van and made the long journey south from Liverpool to London. It was a cold, damp winter. The van, hired by Brian Epstein, had little heating. The roads were slow. At times, they broke down, but eventually they arrived. On the morning of the audition, the boys were nervous but excited. They were scheduled to perform for Mike Smith, a young producer at Decca. The studio was professional, a world away from the sweaty Cavern Club. The Beatles didn't quite know what to expect. They performed 15 songs. Some were covers, familiar tunes like Money, That's What I Want, Till There Was You, and September in the Rain. Others were early Lennon, McCartney originals like Dreamers Do and Hello Little Girl. Their harmonies were sweet, their rhythm tight. But the performance, while enthusiastic, lacked polish. The nerves showed. Mike Smith later said the session was decent, but not remarkable. Decca had auditioned several bands that day, and in the end, they chose another, Brian Poole and the Tremellos. They were from London, closer to the label, more manageable, more refined. And so, when Brian Epstein called to follow up, he received the now infamous verdict. Decca Records had decided to pass on the Beatles. The official reasoning, as it echoed through history, was this: guitar groups are on the way out. The Beatles have no future in show business. Whether those words were said exactly as reported is debated, but the decision was real. Decca had declined to sign the band. The Beatles, still teenagers, had traveled all that way, only to be turned down. For Brian Epstein, it was crushing, but he didn't stop. He took the same demo tape, knocked on more doors, and finally found a listener with open ears, George Martin, the head of Parlophone, a division of EMI. Martin was curious, eccentric, witty. He had produced comedy records before and wasn't entrenched in the norms of pop music. When he met the Beatles, he saw something in them. Not perfection, but potential. He offered them a contract. The Beatles accepted. George Martin also gently suggested a change in the lineup. Pete Best, while reliable, didn't quite mesh with the group's evolving sound. He was replaced by Ringo Starr, a drummer with a steady beat and an affable presence. Now, the puzzle was complete. And with their first official single, Love Me Do, released later that year, the tide began to turn. The world would never be the same. From 1963 onward, the Beatles rose faster than anyone could have predicted. With Brian Epstein's guidance, George Martin's production, and their own relentless creativity, they became the most influential band of the 20th century. Please Please Me, From Me to You, She Loves You, and then I Want to Hold Your Hand, the song that cracked America wide open. Beatlemania had begun. Crowd screamed. Record sales soared. The Beatles weren't just successful, they were revolutionary. They redefined music, style, even youth culture. Albums like Rubber Soul, Revolver, and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band expanded the possibilities of what pop music could be. And all the while, the story of their early rejection lingered like a quiet footnote. Decca Records, the company that had passed on the Beatles, had missed the chance of a generation. To their credit, Decca wasn't destroyed by the mistake. They continued releasing records, signing other acts, and surviving as a label. But the missed opportunity became legendary, a kind of shorthand in the industry, a reminder that even the experts sometimes fail to hear what's coming. Executives at Decca would later say the decision had been more complex than it appeared, that other people at the company had liked the Beatles, that Mike Smith had been in favor but overruled. Some said the tape didn't reflect their true sound. All of that may be true. But the facts remained. They had the band in front of them. They listened, and they said no. The Beatles, for their part, never dwelled on it. They moved forward with humor, grace, and a focus on the next song, the next show, the next adventure. And the rest of the world, well, we got the music, the records, the films, the unforgettable melodies. So what do we make of it? This quiet misstep at the start of something extraordinary. Maybe it reminds us that the future doesn't always look like we expect. That brilliance, when it first arrives, can seem awkward, strange, or unready. That our instincts, even our expert ones, can miss the mark. Decca's rejection wasn't cruel. It wasn't foolish. It was simply human. A choice made in a world where there's never quite enough information, and where the loudest signals aren't always the clearest. But there's something beautiful in that, too, because it shows how the journey of greatness often begins with a no, with a closed door, with the ache of rejection, and how perseverance. Thanks for spending a little time with me tonight, revisiting one of history's great blunders. If you enjoy these quiet stories from the past, I'd be grateful if you gave this episode a like and subscribe.